You're listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast, the podcast for communications professionals in the corporate world who are committed to advancing their work and our field's reputation as critical business advisors that are not only invited to the decision-making table, but are required there. I'm your host, Tara McDonagh. Last year, I did a podcast episode called What About the Women? And I decided a while back to re-release this one in anticipation of International Women's Day, Equal Pay Day, Women's History Month, all those things. Because it says some things that people in our field, especially the women in our fields, but men too, need to hear. And listening to it again while preparing for this reintroduction, I'm struck by just how relevant and yet also how outdated it is. Irrelevant because last year I was sharing how companies would be stepping over themselves to celebrate International Women's Day without doing much about it and ignoring Equal Pay Day for obvious reasons. Today, my guess is many will be silent on both this year for many reasons we just don't have to get into today. It's a very different story from last year and the last several years, though. But also, when I listened again, I heard myself explain a unique challenge in our field. The intersection of what it's like being a woman and what it's like being in a misunderstood and oversimplified field, and what we can do to make it better for ourselves. Belonging is really what I'm talking about here. Allowing women to feel like they belong as they are, as they lead, without needing to edit who they are. So it's still something I'd encourage every woman in this field to listen to. And if you're a man in this field listening to this message, I'd like to thank you for listening, for showing up for your colleagues in this field, and for caring. So with that said, please give this a listen and then let me know what you think about it. But first, I do have a message from our sponsor. I created Raise the Tide to help elevate our field and the women in it. It's part community, part coaching, part professional development, and part mentorship. It encompasses all of these things because it takes all of these things to rise in your career. I asked a few Raise the Tide crew members to share what their experiences have been like in the program, and here's what they had to say. What would you tell someone who's interested in joining?
Do it. It honestly is probably one of the best things I've ever done for myself in my 20 plus year career.
I have received such benefit from this group. I cannot actually express it.
Invest in yourself. I really started this group because it was time for me to invest in me.
To anyone who's interested in joining Raise the Tide, I'd say the return might even end up being well beyond what you might expect. I walked in hoping for some professional clarity, and I've gotten that, but also stayed for the growth and the support and the connection that has come to mean so much to me.
If you're interested in this program, head on over to taramcdonagh.com and complete the Raise the Tide form. A rising tide raises all ships, but we're not the ships. Together, we're the force of the tide, raising the ships for our entire industry. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Communications Business Advisor podcast. Today, we're talking about women in our field. Before we get into the details of what we'll cover, I'm going to address the timing for this episode. International Women's Day and Equal Pay Day intersect within just a few days of each other. By the time this airs, most of you will be prepped for whatever activities you've planned within your company for International Women's Day on March 8th. And you're probably not feeling like it's a massive change-making activity, but rather a have to support DEI in your company. Many of you might feel like it's a bit performative. Some of you might feel like it's genuinely great work, business-changing, life-changing work. And on the other front, you'll likely be avoiding Equal Pay Day, which is on March 12th in the US. Well, at least you'll be avoiding it from a corporate perspective, unless your company has committed to pay women the same as men for the same work and talked about it publicly. And if that's you, that's amazing. Reach out to me and let me know who your company is. I'd love to applaud them. But most of you, from a corporate comms perspective, will avoid equal pay day like it's the plague, while personally and silently hoping it makes a difference in progressing the challenge of equal pay for equal work, because the numbers haven't gotten much better on that equal pay front in 2 decades. Yeah, that's right, 2 decades, and there really hasn't been any budge in a positive direction. For those of you who don't know, Equal Pay Day marks the number of days in the beginning of the year that women must work to match the same pay that men earned in the prior year. So if you're being very vocal about your commitment to women in the workplace and not paying equally, this is your warning. Watch out, because there are some efforts to unmask the performative companies and call them out for their lack of action. Some companies' issues management and crisis comms folks will be very busy on Equal Pay Day, no doubt. So in practical terms, if you're a woman, you worked until March 12th to earn the same pay for the same work that a man earned last year by December 31st. So March 12th, December 31st, that's the difference. Okay. Actually, that's the difference if you're a white woman and you have no children. It's worse if you're a mother. You will have to work until August 6th. Yes, most of the year, and then you'll be paid about the same as men who worked until December 31st of last year. If you're Black, it's July 9th. If you're Latina, it's October 3rd. And for Native and Indigenous women, it's November 21st, almost 1 full year behind the men. Kind of makes you want to burn something down. Well, if you need to burn something, just go burn a candle while you continue to listen in. You might be wondering what any of this has to do with communications. So here's where I'll get a little bit deeper on that. We're in a field where women dominate massively in numbers, but not necessarily in leadership. A 2019 report by KPMG and the Institute of Public Relations noted that 80% of CEO roles in the top PR agencies are held by men. 80% of roles in agencies where we all know what communicators do. 80% in a field vastly dominated by women. The CEO position is held by a man. And most of us will point to a woman we know in leadership role and say, well, what about X woman or Y woman? They're leaders. And if they're doing it, I can too. And yes, C1B1 is real and it's powerful. And I very much advocate for it. It's fantastic. But we also can't ignore the problem. To declare victory over some wins when the data tells us we're not treated equally and our own experiences will tell us the same, we're then ignoring the troubling reality of our world. It's something called the just world hypothesis. We want to inherently believe that the world is a just place, and if something is going wrong, it must be our own fault because we want to control the change. And even when we're provided with facts that show that objectively we're being treated differently, with bias, we deny it. That's something called second-generation bias. Can you tell I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to gender differences, and in particular, how it relates to our field? I studied it in college in addition to my comms degree, and I never really lost sight of this. I'm a bit of a proud nerd on the topic. Now, let's talk about the corporate world. Let's talk about women in communications in the corporate world. So when I speak of leaders in communications, I'm asking, where are the communications leaders in senior roles within companies? Think executive leadership team. I hear from women in our field that they're listened to by executives. I hear that they're respected, that leaders listen to their counsel and often act on their advice. And that is wonderful. I love to hear that. But here's the thing that makes them pause. I'll then ask them, are you given respect to join them as a peer at that executive table where you're advising? Are you even allowed to have a growth path to get you there? And by allow, I mean you intentionally sharing your goals and business benefits and proving to them that you deserve it and the company will benefit from it. Yeah, that causes a pause more often than not. Out there among our listeners, there are vice presidents of communications who are members of the executive leadership team, but they're told that they won't be promoted to the same level of those that they advise as peers. Directors advising senior vice presidents advising the C-suite. They're not given the room to advance into a position where they're advising the peers that they speak with. And when it comes to pay, it's not even remotely close to equal. Is the CCO paid anywhere close to what the COO or CFO, CMO, CHRO is paid? No. The answer is no. And that's even when there is a chief communications officer role to have. More often than not, you're capped at that director or senior director or VP level. And that's as far as you'll go. Not okay. Let's normalize that chief communications officer role and get people in a position where they're advising their peers with equal pay. Now, why does all of this happen? Let me tell you a story, and it relates, I promise. I was in a parking lot outside of the supermarket, and a car backed me up and nearly ran me over. Stay with me on this. So I'm in the parking lot outside the supermarket, and a car backed up and nearly ran me over, and he didn't even look out the back window when he was backing up. When he finally noticed that I was there, it was a very close call. He started moving the car from reverse into drive, and as he was doing it, he said, "Oh, sorry," and then he very fast took off, right? Moved right along. And in that moment, no problem came popping out of my mouth, but he didn't even notice that because he was long gone by the time I said it. And for a second, I thought, well, at least he apologized. Then I thought, a man would never say no problem if that happened to him. A man would give them the death stare. You know the one I'm talking about, the one riddled with delivering anger and fostering shame on the recipient. Or they tell the person loudly to watch where they're going, usually with some sort of head shake at their incompetence. It's interesting how I notice little things like that now. How we as women are made to allow others in our world to feel okay about their mistakes. But if we make one, we're made to agonize over it. We don't let it go ourselves, and others don't let it go either. I'm now thinking about that meme that says, the barista said, "Have a nice day," and I responded, "You're welcome." And now I'll be thinking about that until the end of times, and I need to find a new coffee shop. I mean, it's funny, but it's true. I asked my husband what he'd do if he said that to a barista, and he said he'd probably crack a joke or maybe just never think of it again. Yeah, I think about it because women are made to feel that they can't fail. They have to be perfect. The pressure is on. Women need to perform at 100%, 100% of the time. Make a mistake, and it will be held against you. And we are not wrong. How many times do you see men make errors and it's just dropped? But when a woman makes a mistake, it's going to come up in a performance review, and probably 17 times between now and then. It might block you from a promotion because women have to prove that they've already done the job at the more senior level before they're promoted without making mistakes, something that doesn't always happen in the same way for men. You fumble one time with a response in a meeting and you need to work on, quote, executive presence, unquote, which don't even get me started on that biased term and mindset. Actually, I am going to get started. So when you then ask in response, what do you mean by executive presence? You'll get a vague description back, like you know it when you see it, or a commanding presence in a room. People listen when they speak. They always speak with confidence. And other words like gravitas, those all tend to follow. You're then told to look at specific people who exhibit executive presence, mostly men. And in the odd shot that they recognize citing a woman would be helpful, it's always a woman that's in a role that's very clear to everyone in the company in terms of what they do and how they benefit the company. It's usually like a CFO or a CHRO. But we're in a misunderstood and oversimplified field in communications. So our counsel often starts with a question. We prod in a way that a journalist might, but with our brains wrapped around the business rather than a story. So we often tiptoe into our advice because it's so obvious to us, but it isn't to anyone else. How many times do you sit in a room with smart people, often more senior to you, and you find yourself thinking, am I really the only one who sees this? I must be missing something here because no one is calling out this giant elephant that is in our room. But the reality is that they don't see the elephant. They're not looking at things the way that you are. But if we call out the elephant and say, hey, does no one see this giant gray thing with a long trunk in our room? We'll then be called out for being abrasive, which, by the way, one study shows is a word reserved for women in performance reviews, never men, even when describing the same exact behavior. I did tell you I was a nerd on this subject, right? So we tiptoe in. We might say something like, I'm sure this has been covered in the past, but what are we doing about the giant elephants that might get in the way of our progress? Notice how we start with, I'm sure this has been covered. Now, other tiptoe methods include describing the giant elephant without calling it an elephant until someone else notices it and says, geez, there's an elephant in our room here and we should figure out how to get it out before we proceed. I can feel the palpable release of breath as the communicators in the room think, finally, someone else sees it. I am not crazy. But then the credit also goes to the one calling out the elephant. So we move on to the next thing and never get noticed for the massive save that we just gave to the company, and we don't call it out. Is it because we're women, or is it because we're in a misunderstood and oversimplified field? My view is it's both. But rather than change who we are, rather than edit ourselves to fit into some biased view of what leadership should look and act like, which is white and male because that's what the corporate workplace was set up as, I'm all for embracing who we are. Educate others around us about how we lead today, as we are. Imperfect leaders, but leaders all the same. Leaders that deserve respect, budget, a share of voice at the decision-making table, and pay that matches the respect that so many of us assert we've earned from the executives we work with. Because we're leaders who see the elephants that no one else sees. We're valuable advisors who are in roles that are oversimplified and misunderstood. And we're often women who are told to address things in certain ways or will be viewed negatively and it will impact our career. And we're not wrong. So we don't get credit for our brilliance, and we often don't even notice it ourselves. Then we're told to change who we are and how we lead, which shakes our confidence and our self-esteem. It's right around that director to VP level where we're told to change who we are and how we approach things to lead. And now I'd throw in an expletive for how I feel about that, but this is a clean rated podcast, so I'll keep it clean. What I'll say is this. It's called a double bind. And it's worse than a double standard because the double standard actually has some level you can achieve, even if you have to work harder. The double bind is literally, you're wrong if you do, you're wrong if you don't. You're a pushover or you're a steamroller. You're too tentative or you're too abrasive. You're too self-promotional or you don't share enough about your success. The double bind goes on and on and on. It's a well-studied phenomenon. I know because I've studied it. What most people don't know is that in addition to having a comms degree and working in the field for 25 years, as I mentioned before, I also studied gender differences back at university and never lost my thirst for new knowledge. So you'll find me quoting gender-focused leadership and communication studies about as much as I quote comms studies and practices. So let me share this with you, this message. If you take nothing else away from today, you don't need to change. You don't need to change to lead. The corporate structure needs to change to allow you to lead as who you are. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't need to continue to grow, learn, stretch yourself into an uncomfortable area. You do. But that's very different than fundamental changing. That's very different than editing women to be some sort of male-focused construct of what a leader is. You're a leader. You're a consistently evolving, imperfect, and growing leader, but a leader just the same. The corporate environment accepting that, now that is true inclusion. Okay, well, if you're interested in hearing more about women in our field and topics like how women do not need to apologize for saying sorry, how we don't take the first no as the final no, how networking systems are set up for men, and that's why I created Raise the Tide, or why women are also perpetrators of gender bias, same as men, and it's no one's fault, but it does need to change, check out Raise the Tide on LinkedIn. I share content over there a few days every week, or read up and reach out at raisethetide.net. Let's elevate our field and the women in it, shall we? Okay, that's it. That's the episode. Please let me know what you took away. Send me a message, fill out the form on the TaraMcDonagh.com website, or send me a DM on LinkedIn. And if you're a man and you listened all the way through this, thank you for caring. Thanks for showing up, for listening, for being open to learning a little bit more about another's perspective. Thank you for doing the work to ensure that women can belong in this crazy but fantastic field. And until next time, all of you wonderful communications business advisors, keep advising. See you next time. If you're interested in working with me to advance your work and your team's reputation as critical business advisors, never order takers, check out TaraMcDonagh.com. Thanks for listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a rating or a review. It helps people find us, and we can't ignite a movement without sharing the message. See you next time, where we'll continue to do the work to elevate our field's reputation and elevate the careers of the people in it.